Hi everyone, welcome to 152, and we are actually going to look at Chapter 8, which looks at fiscal and monetary policy in the Keynesian framework. But for this lesson, we are only going to focus on fiscal policy because monetary policy is covered under Section 8.2, which is just going to be covered in ECO152. All right, so after this chapter, we should be able to actually narrate, calculate, and graphically illustrate how how the fiscal variables affect output. So now by the fiscal variables, I'm referring to government spending or changes in taxes. Okay. All right. So now maybe just a recap just to sort of define or explain what fiscal policy is. Fiscal policy basically refers to the use of government spending, usually denoted by letter G, as well as taxes, usually denoted by letter T, as to how do these fiscal variables affect some of the important macroeconomic variables such as income or sometimes referred to as aggregate production. All right, so obviously government can use government spending in two ways. It can either be an increase in government spending or a decrease in government spending, or it can be a decrease in the tax rate or an increase in the tax rate. Now, what you have to understand here is that when government decide to increase its spending, we actually refer to it as expansionary policy. Or when government decide to decrease taxes, it's also referred to as expansionary policy. Um, and then, of course, if government decide to reduce government spending, then of course it's referred to as contractionary policy. Or if it decide to increase the tax rate, it's also referred to as the contractionary policy. All right. Okay. So now, having said that, so I just want us to now sort of try to explain how does this happen? Okay, how does this happen within the Keynesian framework? Sorry, before I come to that graph, I just quickly want to explain. If, say, for example, government want to increase the equilibrium level of income, so obviously it has now to use expansionary policy. So either increasing government spending or decreasing the tax rate. So if government decide to, for example, increase government spending, um, usually this has a direct impact on aggregate spending. Okay, so obviously which will then be multiplied as a result of increase in induced consumption spending. Okay, so that's basically what happens. Or if, say, for example, it wants to increase the equilibrium level by decreasing the tax rate, then obviously this usually happens through the multiplier. So what usually happens is that a decrease in the tax rate or in taxes usually raises the equilibrium level income in an indirect way, because what happens is that when tax um, decreases, then that means that we have more disposable income, and so therefore which translates into more consumption, and so therefore consumption at each level of income, and so therefore for that reason we will then have a translated increase in income or equilibrium level of income as a result of induced consumption spending. And of course, the opposite applies. So if government wants to reduce the level of equilibrium income, then of course the opposite of what I've just explained will then take place. Now, how do we analyze this using the graph? Because what I analyzed earlier was basically, or what I mentioned earlier was basically just the explanation of how would you explain the impact of government spending as well as changes in taxes on the equilibrium level of income. So now, if we want to look at change in government spending using a graph, so this is the graph that we are going to use. So we are going to look at it in the following way. So we are going to look at the situation before and the situation after. So the situation before will actually look like this. So what we should know is that, for example, if we let us assume now that in this case, the government want to increase the equilibrium level of income. So the initial point here is that we have our 45-degree line here, which represents Y. Then we have here A naught here. This is the autonomous expenditure, that's why it's A bar. Then we have E naught for equilibrium level, the initial equilibrium level, because we know that where the this line of aggregate expenditure meets the income line, then that's where the equilibrium is, and we can see the level of income, that it's Y naught. Of course, we know on the vertical axis we have aggregate spending, and on the horizontal axis we have the total income. So now, if government decide to increase its expenditure, so this is what happens. So obviously, what happens is that by increasing its expenditure, autonomous expenditure also increases, and that's why this curve shifts upward such that we have now A1 bar, which is the new level of autonomous expenditure. And then obviously now we see that this new line cuts the Y line here. And so if we extend this all the way down, we can now see the new level of income. So, and this is the new level of equilibrium, hence we name it E1. Now we actually know that at the initial equilibrium level of income at Y naught, what we are seeing there is that we have excess demand. Why do we have excess demand? This is due to the fact that now increasing government spending actually also means that there is increase in aggregate spending, and so therefore this will result in a reduction in inventories. So now, because of that reduction in inventories, so producers now will have to increase production, and so now this sets in motion a multiplier process. So because what now will happen is that increasing production will also result in increase in income level. And when now income level increases, induced consumption expenditure will also increase. And this will now further increase aggregate spending. Okay. So what we are trying to say here is that if production increases, it results in increase in income level. And because of that increase in income level, this income level, so of course, as a result of induced in consumption expenditure, and so therefore this will again uh, result in increase in aggregate spending. And so if this multiplier process continue, so the economy now will find itself at this new equilibrium of E1, okay? And of course, we can actually see that at this new level, so we have higher income level because of increase in government expenditure, and we also have increase in induced consumption, and so therefore that's why we say here um, so and now we can basically then now see here that increase in income is equal to increase in government expenditure, but through the multiplier. So that's why we have alpha here, change in government. So that's why we have change in Y is equal to alpha change in G. Okay, so now let's quickly analyze what happens if there is a change in tax. Now, in terms of tax, now let us consider an increase in tax. So now we actually know that if tax increases, then we actually know that it affects income, and it affects income in a negative way, such that the income that will be left, or the so-called disposable income, will actually be small. So now, if we have to analyze this, so we are basically going to say, all right, if there is an increase in average tax rate, this is what will happen. So initially, what happened is that our autonomous expenditure is here. So in this line, this is the initial line, and we can have, this is our Y line, the 45 degree, and this is our A line, aggregate expenditure line. So and where they meet, this is the equilibrium, and that's why if we extend this all the way down, this is our initial level of income. And then obviously now what happens that if the tax rate increases, so now what happens is that because of the increase in tax rate, so a smaller part of income is available now for induced consumption. And so therefore the aggregate spending will be lower at every level of income. And so therefore that aggregate expenditure line will swivel down because of the decrease in induced consumption as a result of an increase in the tax rate. And so therefore this line will now cut the Y line here. This A line will cut the Y line here, and we will have the new level of income here. And so therefore you can basically see that there's a decrease in income from Y0 to Y1. And that's why we know that at the initial level, what usually happens, or rather, let me rather say, what now happens is that at this initial level of Y0, there's excess supply. Why? There's excess supply because there is a decrease in aggregate spending because of less disposable income that is at hand. And so because of that, this will result in increase in inventories. Now, because of the increase in inventories, then what will happen is that producers will now decrease the production because there is already excess supply, and so this will reverse the whole process of the multiplier, such that the new equilibrium will then be formed here, where we have the new total level of income Y1, and so therefore that is the effect of increase in tax resulting in the lower level of income, or lower level equilibrium of income. All right. So we are not going to look at interest rate because this is monetary policy, and as I said, it's discussed in ECO152. Now let us quickly look at the calculation. So if you look at the calculation, you are usually given the various components of aggregate spending: consumption, investment, government spending, import, exports. This is C, marginal propensity to consume; T, the tax rate; M, marginal propensity to import; and then YF, which is the level of income at full employment. So obviously we have our formula here. So if we substitute all those values, we will be able to calculate the level of income, which is Y0, initial income. So of course we see all the components are given. So if we substitute those values, we will then get the value of Y0. So once we get the value of Y0, we just have to substitute this into this formula. Note that now what we did here, we made change in G as the subject of the formula. So that's why we have change in G equal to change in Y over alpha. Alpha is the multiplier. So basically what we have here, this equation is change in Y is equal to change in G, or alpha change in G. Of course, this is the multiplier. So if we make now change in G as the subject of the formula, so we were already given this value of 2,500 as the YF, that's income level at full employment, minus now the Y0, which we calculated here, divided by 2.5, which is the multiplier. So if we then complete this calculation, we'll come to the value of 460. And so therefore we can now basically just interpret that the current equilibrium income is lower than the equilibrium income under full employment. And so therefore government spending should increase by 460 million. Okay, so this is basically how you arrive to the conclusion of what, say for example, what need to happen. So because Y0 is the current, and then YF is actually what potentially the output would be if there is full employment. And so therefore this is the gap, that difference. So this is the gap. So this is by how much government spending should increase in order to reach full employment. So in order to move from Y0 to Y1, for example, like in the graph. So then it means that government spending should increase by 460 million in order to move to full employment. So this is basically how you look at the impact of these fiscal variables on output. So by explanation, by or graphically, or by calculation. And so this sums our lesson.